Alright guys, so in this video I wanted to talk about another manhwa that has been very popular recently, the past year and such, and that one is Solo Leveling. So you probably heard of it, you probably read it if you've seen this video, and I personally think it's really good, and I think it's very worth the hype. And there are some scenes I want to talk about why it's so good and why other manhwas, comics, or storytellers should follow a similar type of, theme or execution or whatever it happens to be. Do I think it's worth the hype? Obviously, I think it's very good. Why do I think it's good? Well, let's start with this. First off, the artwork. I think the artwork is amazing. I think digitally, the lines are very precise and really well done. The color is awesome. The color is really good, and especially something I wanted to point out was the kinesthetic, the bodies. Because it's an action or fighting type manhwa, the bodies and the body shapes and how they move are very important, to me at least. And I think this is something Solo Leveling gets done really well. It gets the figures, the shapes, the placements, the muscle angles, the force, I don't know, everything. The artist does a really good job of portraying it very lifelike, very accurate to how we would see it in real life. And I think Solo Leveling that's one of its greatest strengths, personally, the art. So if you like this kind of art, honestly, you can't go wrong. I don't see why anyone would dislike it. But yeah, you could tell it's very Korean style as well, so that's pretty cool too. So anyways, next up, the story is an underdog story, and so the audience, us in general, loves underdog stories, whether it comes from like sports or books or comics or just anything. We love a good underdog story because our main character, Sun Jin-woo, is basically the worst hunter in this day and age. And hunters are basically just people who are awakened. They gained abilities to take out dungeons and fight monsters for unknown reasons right now. But he's the worst out of all of them. So keep in mind that even though he's the weakest hunter, he's still stronger than any average human. You know what I mean? So he's stronger than your average human, but he gets a lot of shit for being the weakest hunter, which is kind of ironic because regardless of who it is, there is going to be a weakest hunter, you know? So that's just kind of not really his fault. But the author does this to place him in kind of an underdog situation, so we can kind of move forward with it and kind of gain some sympathy and empathy for him. And we know he's going to get strong, so once he does get strong, we can get a little more excitement in knowing the fact that he was weak before. So I think that's a very powerful plot kind of piece the author put in, and it's very fun to read. So that's something Solo Leveling does really well as well. And now here's kind of the more important part as to why I really like Solo Leveling and why I think it popped off and garnered so much attention and so much hype. It's because they did the first arc, the first execution, the first dungeon in a way that's very simple and easy to understand, yet it was executed in such a perfect fashion, I would say. I wouldn't consider Solo Leveling quite a masterpiece yet, but I do think it is really good. So let's kind of dive into it. The first dungeon, you'll know what I'm talking about. The first dungeon is hype, right? When I was first reading it, I wasn't really sure what I was getting myself into. I didn't really know what kind of the story was about. I didn't know whether if it was like a horror or a thriller or a survival type of manhwa, because that's what it kind of felt like. You know, they're going into a dungeon, they run into these statues that have immense power that's well above their power level. The strongest person in their party is like a C rank guy at most, but these guys have like A rank or S rank type fighting ability, and then they have all these like riddles they have to figure out if they want to survive, and they're basically playing in the hands of this system or these monsters where they don't really have any control of their lives. So it feels like a kind of like an overbearing kind of plot line, like Gantz or something like that, if you read that. And I wasn't sure where this manhwa was going to take off when I was first reading it, because later in the story you realize it's completely unlike that. It's more of like a gaming kind of leveling, more lighthearted, a little more optimistic type of thing. It's still moody, but it's not nearly as dark as the first arc, if you know what I mean. And so that kind of threw me off in the beginning. I wasn't sure what to expect, but they did this for a reason, and I think it played out really well. We got to see a lot of character insights and a lot of plot insights in this first dungeon arc. So it's very detailed, and that's why I like it so much. The first dungeon is church themed, and so we know what they're getting into when they're fighting church type monsters. It's very like, I don't know, scary when you have church or holy type figures that are evil, you know, corrupt. I think that adds to the level of creepiness that these statues have, especially the big statue when he shows that face. When I first saw that, I was like, yeah, it creeped me out. And I think that was very good because it was very emotion getting when you're trying to write something. And this is something I think a lot of other manhwas or mangas or whatever overlook when they're starting like an origin story. They kind of gloss over it. They're like, oh, I was at the top of my power and then I got betrayed and whatnot. And then now this is my revenge story or rebirth story. But they ignore the execution of that, where you have a lot of room to do a lot of cool things with, right? So Solo Leveling does a great job at this first arc part. So basically they enter this dungeon, they're in the boss room, they realize they have no chance of beating these guys, they're about to die. But we get a lot of insights into our character, our MC, and we realize that although he is the weakest hunter, he's actually very quick-witted, very sharp, and very, you know, observant. He's very level-headed in a situation like this where all these other people who are of higher rank like him, like his friend who is the B rank healer, they're really higher rank, but they're actually not that competent, you know? They're not that level-headed in a scary situation like this, where he was able to figure out the riddles, which are actually really simple, you know, if you're level-headed. Like to us, we were just like, oh, well, that's simple. Keep in mind that they're in a life or death situation, so a lot of them were freaking out. But he was the only one who was able to do this, so that was pretty cool. I also think the first arc had a lot of cool character development, even for like little characters we might not be seeing much of later. For example, like the leader of the party, we got a lot of insights into him, which is cool because a lot of people overlook minor characters. A lot of artists and authors overlook minor characters instead of properly developing them out. And when you actually develop them out, you get a better feel for the situation, and it's just better storytelling in general. So basically what they did with this guy is they made him like an old but experienced but capable leader in the C-class hunter rank, right? And then so we knew he was smart, we knew he was competent, and he was the only one who listened to our MC when our MC was pointing out all these other things. So it gave a good contrast because we realized all these other guys, they're very prejudiced towards our MC. They think he's just incompetent because he's the weakest, when in actuality he is the most level-headed in the group, in the party, and the leader was able to recognize that. So we give credits to him for that, which is cool. And then so Sung Jin-woo is basically able to figure out all these riddles. He does the first one, the worship one, the prayer one, and then the musician one, and then the final one, which is kind of like the sacrifice towards the Lord, which is cool because it's so thoroughly thought out for an intro, right? We don't know where this is going. We don't know if he's actually going to die or live, and it keeps us on our toes. So that's pretty exciting to read, at least for me. I couldn't stop, you know, clicking next chapter. So yeah, all the other characters are pretty useless and presumptuous, but we also get some more insight into our MC. We know he's smart, and we also know he's self-sacrificial. So in the end, when it's just them three alone, the three main characters of the first arc, he tells them to go, basically because he can't walk anyways, but he tells them to leave, and knowing that he's pretty much going to die there. So he's a good guy. We know he's a good guy, and that's always nice to see in our MCs. What's so perfect about this arc, to top it off, is that we start to realize his true motives, and his true inner self comes out at the very end when he is about to die. Because when he's about to die, he gets all those flashbacks of people looking down on him, how they really feel exposing themselves when they run. We get to see his true desires, because then he starts to reveal himself like, no, I actually don't want to die. Fuck that. I actually want to live. I want to be stronger. I don't want to be weak anymore. And all those motives come out, and it starts to develop him as a person. And then we see this take off in the rest of the story, which is why it's so dope, because it starts off like this, and the author and everything just runs with it, you know? So that's cool to see. That's why I like the scene so much when he was like getting shanked and stuff like that, even though it was a terribly epic scene, but it was dope to see. But yeah, that's that. That's basically my thoughts, my impressions on the first scene, why I think the church dungeon arc was so good. and why I like solo leveling so much. I will be doing more detailed videos on this stuff soon, so please do like and subscribe this video and this channel if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in another video. Yeah.